screen. I got the share screen. Okay. Pull this up. Here we go. Now, pull this up, pull this up, pull this up, and you'll see what I have in mind. All right. So this down. Good. So I see everybody can see my notes. And you see my famous picture here. You all recognize Charlton Heston holding 10 Commandments. You also notice the Hebrew you cannot read because they did a fairly good job of trying to copy from the script. It was called the Canaanite script, original Hebrew script, as it would have been in the time of Moses. And it was just being compiled shortly before the time of Moses, the first Hebrew alphabets or Phoenician alphabets, Canaanite alphabets. Anyway, but you notice that he's holding 2 tablets. All right, that's like we always have it. And the rabbis always commented that it's very interesting. You look at the 2 tablets, and you've got that symbolic 10 Commandments up there. On the right side, on the right hand, with some Heston's left hand, actually, if you read the Hebrew there, it's on his left hand, which is the correct way to hold it in the Hebrew. Okay, going backwards, yeah. No, it's on his right hand, I'm sorry. It is on his right hand. I'm going backwards. You have, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me, and so on. All number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Shall remember the Sabbath and honor your father and mother. And then on the other side, we have the commands to the human beings. Lo tignov, lo tinaf, you shall not steal, you shall not murder, lo tirtzach. Right, and you can read it in the original Canaanite script if you want. There's regular Hebrew over there, the shorthand, right? So on the left side, sorry, getting my hands mixed up. Where's he holding it? All right, okay, there it should be on the right side. I think he's got his hands mixed up there. Oh no, maybe he's right. I'm trying to hold it back. I'm trying to read it back. Look at it, it's transposed. Yeah, okay. So anyway, he's got it. It's the first, yeah. That it's the earliest Hebrew, right? So it's the same that the Phoenicians used, the Canaanites used, the Hebrews used. They all have the same alphabet, right? So gradually it was transposed to the kind that we have, which is the square script, the Assyrian script, which was introduced sometime at the return from the temple. Samaritans still use that script. There's a whole long history about why this shift was made. But that's the one and only. So anyway, so the question is why on this hand or on that hand there, on the Hebrew side, I'm reading the Hebrew this way on my page, right? So on one side, I've got those commands to God. On the other side, I have those that are commands to human beings. So the rabbis will call this Ben Adam Lemakom, half, and the other half, Ben Adam Chaviros. So you get the 50-50 split. Right? In Judaism, you got a 50-50 split, right? Except notice that actually, honor your father and mother is on the God side. That's a human side, but it's on the God side. It's because the parents are considered as in loco parentis of God. They're stand-in for God here on earth, right? Source of authority, source of wisdom. So, what's our premise here? What are we trying to get at? I'm talking about beginnings of Judaism, fundamentals of Judaism, where there's the people. There's the idea of Torah. There's the idea of one God. Well, what does it mean in action? It's what you do to Ben Adam l'chavero, from one human being to the next. That's the term. Ben Adam, a human being, l'chavero, to her companion. And there's another premise. I'm pulling out some rabbinic lines. Derech Eretz kadma laTorah. The word Derech Eretz has multiple meanings. It literally translates the way of the world, the way of the earth. Derech Eretz, though, in impact is work, hard work, producing things, being productive, and also Derech Eretz, the way we relate to our human beings. Derech Eretz. Chab Derech Eretz in Yiddish is be respectful to someone. So the rabbis interpreted meaning Derech Eretz kadma laTorah, the way of normal actions, productivity, creativity, and our decent relationships with human beings is a prerequisite to the Torah. And how do they teach it? Amar Rabbi Yishmael bar Nachman. We teach this as Rabbi Yishmael Bar Nachman, there are 26 generations that go on into the earth because they're busy with their eretz before we can get the Torah. And how does he know it? Because in the story of the Garden of Eden, there's an angel planted at the exit of the Garden of Eden, and usually we interpret it to prevent us from going back to the tree of life, right? Then the angel says, play on words, Lishmor eder etz achayim. To keep, turns it around. He says, the job is to keep the derech, the way, before you can get to Eitz Chaim, which is the Torah. Humanity's needs, interaction with human people is essential in order to get to Torah. Similar, Frein derech eretz, Yafed derech eretz, im Torah, derech eretz, good work and decency go beautifully with Torah, because when you're involved with both of them, you cannot sin. You don't have time to think about it. Another thing, in the same category, about the value of the relationship between the human being, one human being to the other. We have the famous story of Hillel. A pagan comes to Hillel. I mentioned this when I started my series. Tell me all of the Torah while I stand on one leg. And Hillel goes into his quote, which is very famous. What is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. The rest is interpretation. I go and study. Not enough just to say nice things. You got to actually learn it. But here's the point. What you can't stand to you, don't do to the other one. That's the Torah. That's the beginning. Now, that's the negative version of the golden rule that is in the Christian scriptures, where it is do unto others what you want done. There are great debates which one is the better form. It turns out that both forms pre-exist, both Hillel and Jesus, in Jewish sources, both the positive and the negative. In other words, that's a general, generic Jewish understanding, going back to the before the rabbis. So, same thing. What is the major important principle of the Torah? Rabbi Akiva, and I mentioned this one also. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai. Right? Love the Lord your God. I say so. I'm God. I say so. Therefore, love your neighbor as yourself. Again, Klal Gadol, this is the great principle of Torah. Notice also Christian scriptures. Also, Jesus asked, "What's the major principle?" And he says the V'ahavta from Shema, and this: love your neighbor as yourself. In one version, he is asked by a Talmid Chacham, scholar of the law, and in another version, he asked the scholar of the law, the Talmid Chacham. In either case, the point isn't we're getting at what Jesus is quoting are deep fundamental principles already understood in the Jewish world 2,000 years ago. And speaking as a Jew, we have to remember that. So let's go into the Talmud itself now. What's the important principle in the Torah according to the Talmud? What do we have? How many mitzvot do we have traditionally? How many mitzvot? What do we always talk about? 613. 613. Yeah, 613. Somebody pointed out, what is it? There's this movie called Nope about creatures from outer space. And somebody says, and the timing in the notes, they get some message from outer space, something like that, is 6 minutes and 13 seconds, which is 613. So something, they're sneaking in a Jewish point, or in these aliens in space, the Jewish, who knows? 613. So where do we get that from? It's in the Talmud, in Makot, and it starts out as a preaching of Rabbi Simlai, 613. You've heard this before. There are 365 according to the days of the year, negative don'ts, 248 do's based on the bodies of the human being, body parts of the human being. And now that's not enough. Comes David, he says 613, that's not the Klal Gadol, that's not the key. Only there are 11 principles, 613, go down to 11. And what are they? Psalm 15. Who shall sojourn in thy tabernacle? He that walks uprightly, works righteousness, speaks truth in his heart, no slander, no evil, no reproach, despises the vile person, honors those that fear God, swears to his own hurt, changes not, puts not his money on interest, does not take a bribe against the innocent. All right? There, only 11 principles. Nowhere does it say he goes to shul on Shabbos. Notice, right? That's what it says. Then came Isaiah and reduced them to 6 principles. I did. That's not enough. Let's see what I can get down to. 6. He that walks righteously, speaks uprightly, despises the gain of oppression, shakes his hand from holding a bribe, stops his ear from hearing blood, shuts his eyes from looking upon evil, he shall dwell on high. Not enough. Then we're doing a lot of. What happened to the 613? What happened to the kosher? What happened to the tefillin? What happened to all of that? He's shrinking it down, shrinking it down, shrinking it down. Only 3 principles. Micha. It has been told man what is good, right? Matov, what does the Lord request from you? Do justice, asok mishpat, love mercy, avat chesed, and walk humbly before thy God. Finally, he remembered God. First you do justly, and you act mercifully, then you can walk in the presence of God, humbly, not boastfully, but humbly. Right? Precedent. Comes Isaiah. Let's get it down even less. It says, keep justice, do righteousness. What happened to everything else in religion? Can't start it if you don't do these 2. Can't start. Then comes Amos, always reducing, says, seek me and live. One must pursue God actively. Oh, now we're getting back to religion. But then comes Habakkuk, who says, all in one principle, the righteous shall live by his faith. Tzaddik me'emunato yichya. Now, that would sound like we're going back to religion. But that's an English translation, which Martin Luther, by the way, who did the German translation, based his whole Reformation on, by the way, on the idea that it is the faith that is the foundation. But as our scholars point out, emunah is not faith, is not blind faith. Tzaddik me'emunato yichya is reliance, reliability. So the correct translation that the commentary is saying here, the righteous man is rewarded with life. Tzaddik, one who is truly righteous in his behavior, by his reliability, his reliance, shall live. Right? Different thinking, different interpretation. Same verse. Right? But it's the whole point. What is it going down to? What is it going down to? The righteous behavior of the human being. Tzaddik, not meaning somebody who sits and davens all day long. Tzaddik means someone whose behavior is outstanding, is noble, is generous, is involved with other people. That's tzaddik. Again, where do we get our sources from in the Torah? Well, there is I'm going to pull up some of these. We have Kedoshim, chapter 19 of Leviticus, sometimes called the Holiness Code, because it says, you shall be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And it talks about right after that, honor your father and mother, fear your mother and father, and don't go to idols and so on, similar to the Ten Commandments, and then continues few religious interpretations, but then says, oh, remember, you set aside some of the corners for the poor. Remember, don't steal, don't deceive, don't lie to your fellow, don't take my name in vain, don't lie, don't use my name to lie, don't oppress your neighbor, don't swear in front of a deaf person who can't hear you, don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. And of course, you have the famous last line, which Hillel said, which is, line, you can see my hand there, okay. Lo tikov v'lo titor, you shall not take vengeance nor bear grudge, but love your fellow as yourself. Here he puts the word Israelite. However, in another place, a few verses down, uses the same phrase to refer to the stranger who has come to dwell among you. Same phrase. So I question their use of that interpretation there. All right. So that's a pretty strong foundation for putting human relations up front. And each one of these is highlighted and has a signature. I am the Lord your God. You got to do it. This is my command. You don't get it, you're lost. Don't talk to me about believing in me. If you don't get it with these, you're lost. Right? Go ahead. Then another verse. Let's build on Deuteronomy. It says, what does God want for you? Walk his ways and love the Lord and walk in his path and cleave to him. So the question is, how do we walk in the path of God? God is up there. How do I walk up there in power and in the infinite? And the explanation. To walk in his ways, Sifra, if you want the quotes. What are the ways of the Holy One? Where we have the verse, God is merciful and compassionate. Well, if God is merciful and compassionate, you shall be merciful and compassionate. As God is patient, you shall be patient. And it goes on and on. God clothes the naked, like Adam and Eve. You should clothe the naked. God feeds the hungry. I showed them how to plant food. You shall feed the hungry, and so on. God buries the dead as he buried Moses. You should do the same thing. Right? That is to be godlike. So we are not a religion of generalities, though. We don't want just general guidelines. So just to wrap up sort of the concept, where do we go from there? In the Bible itself. We want to set up a society, a functioning society. So we go here, Mishpatim. Right after the 10 Commandments, there's 10 very general statements. Specific, what happens with a slave? What happens with a slave woman? Under what conditions are they set free? What happens if a person attacks intentional homicide as opposed to accidental homicide? What do we do? One who attacks his parents, what do we do? One who steals a human being and sells him, like slave traffickers do till today, what do we do? Right? When two people are fighting, one is injured, what do we do? Right? Very specific. What's very specific? Two people are fighting, and somebody is pregnant. In between, what happens then? What do we do? Very specific, right? We're not talking about generalities. We have to have very specific rules. Same thing, what about government? We have the concept of government, right? Well, what do we do for government? Shoftim v'shotrim. You have to set up a system of justice. Moses comes out of Egypt. Before he gets to Sinai, he has to have an administrative state. He can't go to Sinai without some kind of social administration so people can handle their affairs orderly. It's repeated actually again here in Deuteronomy. Same thing. And so Deuteronomy goes on. Judges and officers of the court, you must establish. You may not distort the judgment of, you may not judge unfairly. You may not show partiality. You may not take a bribe. Bribe blinds the eyes of the righteous and the wicked and the wise. Chase justice. Don't wait for it to come to you. All right. Then we go. Don't have idols and so on, right? But first you have to have the justice. And then following up, what about a system of administration? Don't we want to have somebody to rule us? Okay. You want to have a king? Som tasim alecha melech. It's in Deuteronomy also. You want to have a king? Okay. May not build up, lo yabesusim, may not build up too big of an army, because he will put the people in debt, building up the army, have to sell you down to Egypt to do it. He may not have multiple wives, like King Solomon. Multiple wives cost money to the treasury. It means taxation that is not essential. And when he does sit on the throne, he has to have the Torah in front of him so he knows what he is doing. That's his constitution. He cannot go and be the dictator, right? So all of these restrictions, how do we administer a state, right? We begin to develop these. That is what we are doing. Right? It's not enough to just give generalities. We want to have specifics. We get into the Mishnah, and again, the Mishnah is the Code of Jewish Law. And look at this. There's a whole section called damages. Baba Kama, liabilities for damages. Baba Metzia, disputed properties. Baba Bat, relation between neighbors and land ownership. Sanhedrin, how to set up courts and testimony. Makot, how do you set up the punishment? What do you do with false witnesses and refuge for accidental homicide? Oaths, process of attorney, issuing oaths. Laws on various topics. What are the regulations of idolatry? Pirkei Avot, and so on. Right? As a whole, this whole section, so that's 1/6 of Mishnah just on a just society. You go then to Rambam, his great Mishnah Torah, his great code. He gives extensive rules on civil and criminal and political laws. And even the Shulchan Aruch, which So I was thinking for many Orthodox Jews, take it as the number one go-to source. One half of the Shulchan Aruch has to do with human relations. Choshen Mishpat, interpersonal laws, financial disputes, and Even HaEzer, fair relations between husband and wife. What is accepted, what is not accepted. And I'm just going to wrap up with this. How then do we go down to the modern society? We said that what we're putting on is that derech eretz kadma Torah, that one must have a working of the relationships from one human being to another before we can go to Torah, before we can go to heaven, before we can deal with God. I worked for a while when I lived in Israel with the Deputy Attorney General of Israel, Professor Nachum Rockover. He was entrusted with a task from the Knesset to look for precedent in Jewish law for the modern society. Right? We have had ongoing laws, but we didn't have it organized for a state. Now, how do we build a state based on Jewish tradition? Not necessarily a religious state, theocracy, but based on the heritage of Jewish Moreshet HaMishpat Ivri, the Hebrew law. And so there's a website, but this is the English version. I'm just going to show you the English version, and then we're going to wrap up with that. Library of the Jewish Legal Heritage Society. And you can see here, look what kind of topics go into it. I'm going to enlarge it so you can see. Jewish law in the courts, civil procedure in Jewish law, commerce in Jewish law, ethics in the marketplace, copyright, rule of law in Jewish sources, law in the Noachites, right? Between Jews and non-Jews, unjust enrichment in Jewish law. It's called Oseh Osher Velo Beyosher. You get rich, but not honestly. Ends that justify the mean, human dignity in Jewish law, sacrificing one to save the many, obligation acquisition in Jewish law on the basis of promises, protection of privacy, rehabilitation of criminals in Jewish law, judges in Jewish sources, right? So what am I getting at? Even environment and ecology, precedents in Jewish law, right? Just going on and on and on. This endless stuff available, more and more. I'm just going to show you can see all this. And that's their job. So what am I getting at? I'm going to close this down and sort of wrap here. As I said, I didn't want to go on forever and ever. This Shabbat, whole point, this very important leg of Jewish teaching, which is Ben Adam L'Chavero. You can see how much there is of this, the relationship between one human to the fellow, as essential before one can deal with religion. Essential. So with that, let's go to Adon Olam, and we'll join in together. Pick a melody. Which one do you want? Regular. Okay. Barbara, you help me. Page 514. All together. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nevra Li'et Na'atza B'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora Vehu haya, vehu hove, vehu yeh betifara, vehu echad, ve'ein sheni, lehamshir lo lehabira, beli reishi, beli tachlit, ve'lo ha'oz, ve'hamisra, vehu eli, V'chai goali, v'tzorchev li b'eit zara, v'hu nisi umanos li, menat kosi b'yom ekra b'yado, afkiduchi,